Okay, last little bit of this lecture. Excuse me. I want to talk about nasalized vowels. We've talked about this diacritic for vowels before, back when we were talking about narrow transcription of English. But basically, if a vowel is nasalized, you can put a little tilde over it to represent that fact using the IPA. And what that means when you nasalize a vowel is that you're basically lowering your velum so that air can flow through your nose as it's flowing through your mouth as you produce the vowels. You have air going through two different passageways, and that makes things pretty acoustically complex and also gives it a distinct sort of quality when you listen to it. And in fact, there are a lot of languages in the world which use this option when they produce vowels. So there are contrasted nasal vowels or nasalized vowels in almost 20% of the world's languages. And kind of the most famous example of this is from French. And I'm going to play these samples, and you might notice that these are transcribed in a particular way, but sometimes the nasalization kind of shifts the height of the vowel or appears to shift the height of the vowel. So the main thing to kind of focus on is the oral versus nasal contrast, but some of these vowels might not be exactly as they're transcribed here.
Le,
Let me make that louder.
le,
So that's kind of high mid.
l'un,
That's more of a low mid type vowel.
la, l'an, le, lundi, lundi,
For some reason, this doesn't want to cooperate on this particular slide.
l'eau, long,
So it's cutting some of these off, but
l'eau, long,
I think you can hear that fairly well. And to produce these, kind of going back to like what I was talking about with producing an open O, we get open O in a context of O followed by R, the phoneme O followed by R in English. So you can say like for to get a sense of where that open O is. Where we find nasalized vowels in English at a phonetic level is in front of nasal stops. For instance, the word long, you might nasalize the vowel in long, which might make it sound a little bit like this. So try to say long or something like that without actually saying the nasal stop at the end, and you might be able to get a handle on that nasalized vowel. Long, it might sound like that. It's kind of hard to focus on what you're doing with your velum because you don't really have a good feel for it back there. If you want to sort of just focus on like what, pushing air through your nose as you say this, like scrunch it up or whatever it takes, that's fine too. When you record yourself in the production exercises, all I want you to be able to do is produce these nasalized vowels, but that's just one way to get about it, is to pretend that there's a nasal stop after it. So let's practice with that. You can do this at home, just sing along.
le, l'un, le, lundi, la, l'an, l'eau, long,
Long, so on and so forth. Okay, so like I said, when you look at these things acoustically, they get messy pretty quickly. So there are formants for both passageways through your nose and your mouth because they're kind of two different resonating tubes. And because they also kind of suck energy out of each other, there are also these things called antiformants which kind of reduce the energy that you'd expect to find where the formants are. In addition to that, nasalization will expand bandwidth, so bandwidth is basically a measure of kind of the width of these gray bars in the frequency scale in spectrograms, and what nasalization tends to do is kind of smear those so that they're not as intense in the middle and they have kind of a broader range of frequencies. We don't need to worry about all the details. I'll just let you know that when you see these things in a spectrogram, what you wind up seeing is that there's a lot of messiness in nasalized vowels. It's kind of hard to find where one formant begins and another ends. And they're all not as intense as they would be otherwise. So these are examples from a language spoken in southern Mexico called Chinantec. That's a non-nasal vowel or an oral vowel. And that's a nasalized vowel. And you can kind of see it's hard. It looks like there's a bunch of formants, which is what you get when you have two different resonating tubes. And they're all not as intense, and they're all kind of smeared as well. So because nasalization smears vowel bandwidths. It can obscure vowel height differences. We kind of heard that a little bit with the French examples. High vowels can kind of sound low or lower, and low vowels can sound high or higher. And this is an interesting phenomenon. So in the American South and parts of the Midwest, or the vowels in words like pen and pin have merged because they tend to be passively nasalized. And so that's just a vowel height distinction between and and that disappears. So people who speak these varieties of English might say, like, I need a writing pin as opposed to a sewing pin, something like that. I actually remember back in the day, I used to listen to the radio in grad school when I lived in Ohio. I guess we're walking through all the different places I've lived when I'm talking about vowels today. But used to live in central Ohio, and on the radio there, they used to have this sort of contest or promotional activity where they in the middle of playing songs, they just say, oh, your secret word for today is blah blah blah, and then you'd go to a website and put in that word, and you get bonus points for some sort of things you could buy or something. Anyways, one day I was listening to the radio, and the DJ came on and said, today's mystery word is spin. And I'm like, what the heck is spin? And spin is actually spin. So it doesn't really matter how you say it in Central Ohio, but as long as you get somewhere in that vicinity, people will hopefully understand what you're saying. Context probably helps, though. So, like I said, for these French vowels, this first one is probably more of a high mid vowel.
Le.
The second one is probably more of a low mid.
Lin.
Where do you nasalize it? This other pair of mid vowels, first one's more high mid.
Lo.
This one's probably more low mid.
Long.
So keep that in mind when you try to produce them. It's just something kind of happens as you nasalize it because of the acoustics. I have these examples. I need to record better ones because there's background noise here, which makes it even worse. But this is me trying to show you what happens when you nasalize vowels passively in English. Here's the word bowed.
Bowed.
And I can even, when I play it, I can hear the echo from the room I recorded it in.
Bowed.
All right. Sorry about that. Anyways, here's the word bound.
Bound.
Where I try to nasalize, especially this last part here. So this part of the diphthong is nasalized. You can see here, like I said, what happens with nasalization of vowels is that, or one of the things that happens is that the intensity of the formants kind of fades out. So it's pretty nice and clear where the formants are in this example.
Bowed.
Even though it's not a great recording, but what happens here is the intensity of these formants kind of fades out and everything kind of gets smeared. That's a great cue when you're looking at these things. The vowel is nasalized.
Bound.
And after a while, you can really easily pick up on that. Here's another kind of fun phenomenon phonologically. So this is a language called Sundanese, which is spoken in Indonesia, and it has kind of a famous pattern in phonology circles of nasal spreading. So you might get a nasal stop somewhere in a word, and then for some reason the nasalization of that nasal stop just kind of spreads throughout the word. So these are also not super great examples. It's not always easy to find Sundanese speakers. I'll say more about that in a second, but we'll go with these, and hopefully you can hear the nasalization. And I think you can hear it here, maybe not too badly, as opposed to. And what makes this interesting for phonologists is that in some cases the nasalization stops. So here it's spreading from the M throughout the word, at least through the vowels. And in these cases it goes all the way through the word, but over here it stops. So it starts going through the word and then it stops. So the question I usually like to pose, which is more of a phonology question than a phonetics question, is why does it stop? And I just realized I was going to, normally when I ask a question like this in these video lectures, I want to stop the video, but we only have a couple slides left, so I'm not going to do that. And I also realized I don't really need to answer the question because it's phonology, not phonetics. So if you can figure out why is it not stopping here and why is it stopping here in the words, more power to you. And I don't know. I'm happy to give you one bonus point on your homework if you can send me the right answer by email. We'll see how many people actually watch these and like take me up on the offer. Got to get the answer right though. So what I was going to say is, when I was in grad school, another Central Ohio story is that we had a field methods class where we found a speaker of Sundanese, and our professor was pretty excited about it because he wanted to study this pattern. I was like, oh, real live speaker of Sundanese. So we wanted to get data on this. It was kind of funny the way it worked out, though. We had this kind of nasal airflow set up in the basement of the linguistics building, which is what you're supposed to use for these things, because it's basically, the way it works is it's a mask that kind of has a divider in the middle, and then it has these kind of pressure transducers in the two different chambers. So one for your nose, one for your mouth, and it will measure basically how much airflow is coming out of your mouth or your nose as you say whatever in speech. And so you're supposed to fit it over your mask, sort of like a breathing mask, and then you can get data on how much nasalization there is in any particular vowel. Unfortunately, so we got all like prepared for this, and we had like, okay, you take care of this part of the machine, you like transcribe what the person's saying, so on and so forth. It was like going to be a big deal for our field methods class. And then we got the guy in the lab, and he was actually a relatively small guy, and we put the mask on him, and the sort of chamber for the mouth like fit over both his nose and his mouth because it was too big for his face, and so it was just a complete wash. We didn't get any data from it at all. So another way you can kind of study vowel nasalization is a tool that we have in the lab at the University of Calgary, which is called Nasometer. And this is, I've got some pictures here because they sell this as a therapeutic tool for kids who are going through speech therapy. But I'll explain why it works, or how it works first. And instead of having like two closed chambers, this has like a little baffle or a little sort of board which you can kind of stick so that it comes up against this little thing in between your nose and your mouth. What is it, filter? Is that what it's called? I can't remember. Anyways, so it's got microphones on both on top and on bottom of this little board, so it doesn't measure air pressure per se like we normally think of it. It gives you like sound pressure basically, and there's of course there's a little bit of bleed between these two because they're not like acoustically isolated from each other, but it gives you some measure of what's coming out of your nose versus your mouth, and it'll give you a measure of how much nasalization is taking place. And the reason this is a therapeutic tool is because some kids are born with cleft palates. And as you might imagine, when you have a cleft palate and there's just like no sort of boundary inside your mouth or vocal tract between your oral and nasal passageways, you're going to nasalize everything because you can't help it. So you can fix that surgically, which is great. But then when kids have lived a part of their lives or acquired some speech before knowing how to kind of close off one passageway from the other, they have to go through therapy to sort of learn how to do it after the cleft palate has been patched up. So a nasometer can give you real life feedback on how to do that in real time. So that's why there's pictures of kids here. But anyways, if you do have measures of oral and nasal airflow, you can get a sense of how much air is coming out of your nose or your mouth as you speak. So that gives you also a nice clear sense of when a vowel is nasalized. So here's some examples from the Sundanese words. So like a palatal nasal like nya. Here has airflow coming out of the nose without any airflow coming out of the mouth. But then the vowels after it get nasalized. So we have concomitant airflow coming through the nose and the mouth. As we go, we get a little more airflow for a low vowel than for a high vowel, so on and so forth. But this gives you a nice clear measure. So like a T, it doesn't really have much airflow either way, so on and so forth. This is a nasalized vowel where we have nasalization here. This is not a nasalized vowel, so we don't have nasalization here. That's a good way to measure it if you have access to such equipment. I think that's the end. Yep, that's the end. So I'm going to stop there. Thanks for your patience and bearing with this. We're going to move on to something other than vowels next time.